So you want to buy a private army. Or at the very least, you want to know what actually happens after you hire some ex-special forces and start billing governments. First of all, the most successful private army in American history didn't make its money from combat. Out of 40,000 missions Blackwater ran in Iraq, only 200 ever involved a single shot fired. So what exactly did the United States pay this company $1 billion for? What does this industry actually sell? Why will governments pay 6 times the price for it? And why does almost everyone who starts one of these companies eventually end up in prison or on a plane that mysteriously falls from the sky? In 2007, at the height of the Iraq War, the US Congress published a report that finally told America how much one Blackwater contractor in Baghdad actually cost. $1,222 a day, which works out to roughly $445,000 a year for a single man with a rifle. A regular American soldier doing the same job on the same street, in the same uniform, and with the same rifle cost the US taxpayer about 6 times less. Out of that $1,222, the contractor himself took home around $600. The rest went to his weapons, body armor, insurance, logistics, and the company's margin on top. Blackwater took 15 to 25% on every contract. Logistics alone, moving one armed contractor from a training base in North Carolina to Baghdad with full kit, life insurance, and a medical evacuation plan cost around $30,000 to $50,000 before he had fired a single shot. And these were not small contracts. In 2008, Blackwater kept just 987 armed contractors in Iraq, less than the size of one regular army battalion. With those 987 men, the company protected the entire American diplomatic corps in Iraq, from the ambassador down to visiting congressmen, and the State Department paid nearly $1 billion for the contract. The US government could have hired its own army to do the same job, 6 times cheaper, and didn't. The premium was not paid for the man. Blackwater was hiring the same ex-special forces the American military had trained and released. It wasn't paid for the weapons either. A rifle costs the same in any hand, and not for the experience, which was identical. So, what was the premium actually for? The answer becomes visible if you look at one date. March 31st, 2004. That morning, in the Iraqi city of Fallujah, insurgents ambushed a Blackwater convoy and killed 4 contractors. Their bodies were mutilated and hung from a bridge over the Euphrates River, and photographs went around the world. The American response was immediate. Within a week, the Marines launched the First Battle of Fallujah, a full-scale military operation against the city. With aerial bombardment, urban assault, thousands of troops, and hundreds dead on both sides. All of it triggered by the death of 4 men. But the 4 men were not American servicemen. They were private contractors, which means their names ended up on no official memorial, their coffins did not return to Dover Air Force Base, and their funerals were not on CNN. Politically, their deaths could move an entire war machine. Statistically, those deaths did not exist. In 2010, for the first time in any American war, more private contractors died in Iraq and Afghanistan than regular US soldiers. Through the second half of the war, the US government had quietly shifted the dying onto people whose deaths it did not have to report. This is what the premium actually buys. When a regular soldier dies, the government inherits a long list of obligations: a military pension for his family, a congressional report explaining what he was doing there, a flag-draped coffin that arrives on the evening news, and a name added to a list that voters can count. None of those obligations exist for a contractor. The premium pays the difference between a soldier's death, which the state has to absorb, and a contractor's death, which it does not. Across 40,000 missions, no client Blackwater was protecting was ever killed. Across the same missions, 30 Blackwater contractors died. The work was mostly defensive, escorting diplomats, holding compounds, and when men did die, no one outside the company knew their names. This is the American model, and it needs lawyers, lobbyists, contracts, and Senate hearings to function. But there is another way to do exactly the same business. Yevgeny Prigozhin was a former convict who sold hot dogs in St. Petersburg until he got close enough to Putin to cater his state dinners. By 2018, he was running Russia's largest private army, the Wagner Group. That year, Wagner entered the Central African Republic, a country of 6 million people with a permanent insurgency and a government that barely held its own capital. There was no contract and no bank transfer. Wagner simply took control of the Indasima gold mine, the largest in the country, with estimated total reserves of around $2.8 billion, and began extracting gold and shipping it to Russia. In Sudan, Wagner controlled the country's main gold processing plant. In Syria, Wagner received from the Assad regime a share in oil and gas fields it had recaptured from ISIS. In 2022 and 2023 alone, Wagner generated roughly $2.5 billion in gold for the Kremlin. What Blackwater accumulated in 13 years of contracts, Wagner pulled out of African ground in 2. In 1995, a small South African company called Executive Outcomes signed a contract with the government of Sierra Leone to suppress an insurgency that had been tearing the country apart for 5 years. 200 men, 21 months of work, a fee of $35 million plus a stake in the country's diamond mines as a bonus. And one more date, March 27, 2022, in the Malian town of Moura. Wagner had been hired by the country's military government to clear out jihadist fighters from a market town in central Mali. According to Human Rights Watch and the United Nations, the operation ended with around 500 civilians killed. The worst single incident of mass violence in Mali's entire civil war. Wagner was paid in gold mining rights and a reported $10 million per month from the Malian state. The American model and the Russian model are selling the same product. The only difference is the form of payment. Some governments route the money through Congress. Some pay in gold that disappears into Russian accounts. But the same thing that makes this business profitable also makes it fragile. Every private army carries structural weaknesses that no contract can fix. The first one comes from inside. On September 16, 2007, 3 years after Fallujah, a Blackwater convoy of 4 armored vehicles drove into a square in central Baghdad. 20 minutes later, 17 Iraqi civilians lay dead on that square, with children among them. According to other Blackwater contractors who were there, one of the guards simply began firing and could not stop. Another contractor put a rifle barrel to his head to force him to. The Iraqi Prime Minister demanded the company be expelled the next day. 2 years later, Blackwater lost its license to operate in Iraq. Eric Prince eventually sold the company. The name was changed 3 times to put as much distance as possible between what it had been and what it had done. Blackwater was not destroyed by the Iraqi insurgency, not by Congress, not by journalists. It was destroyed by one man on its own payroll who had a bad day in Baghdad. When your product is armed men in foreign countries, your biggest threat is never the enemy. It is your own convoy. The second one comes from outside. A private army has a strange ceiling. The smaller you stay, the more useful you are. The bigger you grow, the more dangerous you become to the person who hired you in the first place. In June 2023, this is exactly what caught up with Prigozhin. By then, Wagner had become the most successful private army Russia had ever produced. It had taken Bakhmut, the bloodiest single battle of the war in Ukraine, at the cost of tens of thousands of men, many of them prisoners recruited directly from Russian penal colonies. It controlled gold and diamond mines across Africa. It had its own armored columns, its own air defense, its own propaganda machine. Prigozhin himself had become a public figure with millions of followers, openly criticizing the Russian defense minister on national television. He was no longer just a contractor, he was a parallel state with his own army. So on June 23, 2023, after months of feuding with the defense ministry over ammunition and control, Prigozhin raised 25,000 of his men and marched them on Moscow. His stated goal was the removal of Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Whether he intended to stop there has never been confirmed. 24 hours later, with his column 200 kilometers from Moscow, Prigozhin turned around. The president of Belarus publicly reconciled him with Putin. He was forgiven. 2 months after that, his private jet exploded in midair over the Tver region, with his deputy and Wagner's chief financial officer on board. Within a year, Wagner was dissolved. Most of its men were absorbed into the Russian Ministry of Defense or rebranded into a state-run successor called the Afrika Corps. The better your private army gets, the closer it comes to being a real one. And no government, democratic, authoritarian anywhere, can tolerate a real army it does not officially own. The global market for private military services today is around $274 billion and growing. By 2026, international monitors are tracking active armed conflicts in over 30 countries: Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, Eastern Congo, and a Middle East still rattling from the joint US-Israeli strikes on Iran in February. Each one of those conflicts is generating demand that no official army can politically supply. This industry exists because governments need the ability to act without declaring. Democracies cannot afford a certain number of coffins coming home, and authoritarian regimes cannot afford official wars because official wars require votes and explanations. Both ends of the political spectrum buy the same thing from private companies: not men, not weapons, but the ability to fight a war that officially does not exist. 10 companies share most of the global market between them. The largest of them, Allied Universal, which absorbed G4S after the 2021 merger, pulls in around $21 billion a year on its own. Constellis, the company that absorbed Blackwater after the rebrand, runs 22,000 armed contractors across more than 30 countries. According to forecasts, the industry's total annual revenue is expected to grow by an additional $175 billion over the next decade, primarily due to new government contracts that have not yet been signed and conflicts that have not yet happened.